Stephen here with Fig Boot on Pens. Today I have something a little different for you. Well, different for me at least. It's something that I haven't done previously, which is an ink review. I'm not going to quite commit to this being a regular feature, but I at least wanted to try out a few to see how it goes. There's a lot of folks out there who do a really great job of ink reviews on YouTube and in blogs, and I wanted to make sure that I could bring something unique to the table, whatever that may be. The ink I'm going to be taking a look at today is Pelikan's Edelstein Color of the Year for 2017, which is Smoky Quartz. This ink here was generously provided to me by the good folks at Goulet Pens. They actually provided me with two bottles, one to use for this review and another to give away. So stay tuned to the end of this review and I'll let you know how you could win your very own bottle of this ink, courtesy of Goulet Pens. If you care to check out the ink on their site, there's a link below in the notes. Okay, how about we take a look at this ink, and in order to do so, let's switch over here to camera 2. So what we have here is Pelikan Edelstein Smoky Quartz. It's a kind of a smoky, chocolatey brown with some green undertones. This is what the bottle looks like. You know, while I really like the looks of the Edelstein bottle, I can't say it's my favorite in regard to function. It's rather shallow and wide. And, you know, if you have a pen with a really large nib, let's say a Pelikan M1000, it can be really tough to get that nib in here in order to get a fill if the bottle isn't 100% full. Now, this bottle contains 50 milliliters of ink, and just for comparison, here is a bottle of Pilot Iroshizuku Amairo, and this also contains 50 milliliters of ink, but it's more narrow and tall, which makes it easier to get fills for your larger nib pens over a period of time. So just in regard to bottle design, I kind of like the thinner, taller more than the squatter, fatter. Now, I used 3 pens for this review. Well, 4 actually. For the header here, I actually used a Pilot Parallel with a 2.4 millimeter nib. This is actually what the nib looks like. One thing I noticed right away is the color variation you can achieve with this ink depending on how heavy it's applied. You know, here is the very first swab that I did in regard to this ink, and you can see how dark it is, and that for these swabs, I do a Q-tip in an ink, and I'm pretty generous with the ink distribution. But after writing with this with a fine nib for a little bit, I noticed that it just wasn't quite the same color, but it was a little bit on the lighter side. So what I did was I did another swab that wasn't quite as generous, and you could really tell the difference. These are the exact same inks, but just being rather generous and not so generous with the ink. And so you could really tell the difference between the heavier and the lighter applications. So you're going to get, if you have a thicker, more generous nib, you're going to get a much darker color than if you have one that is more on the fine side. In regard to some other color comparisons, this is what it looks like in regard to Mont Blanc Toffee Brown. Then here it is with Faber-Castell Hazelnut Brown and Pilot Iroshizuku Tsuki. And then finally, kind of a more redder brown, the Bung Box Piano Mahogany. Now, I'm using Rhodia 80 gram paper, which you can see here that has kind of minimal amount of bleed through. Here in this area here, I dabbed the ink and then kind of spread it out so you can really see again the difference between the lighter and the heavier applications. And that there was just minimal bleed through. In this area, I really dabbed the ink on here heavily. And then in these areas over here, it did bleed a bit more where I did more passes, mainly because the this 2.4 nib has a tendency to scratch the paper a little bit and dig into it a little bit more. So that's what accounted for that bleed through. So I think that's more on the pen that I was using as opposed to the paper or the ink. So in regard to the other pens I used, first of all, we have a Sailor Pro Color. This is a Sailor Pro Color. And this is a fine steel nib. And then, in regard to a medium nib, we have this pen right here, which is the Visconti Desert Springs. Divina. And this is a medium 23 karat palladium nib. And then finally we have a Lamy All-Star, and this is the, like I said, the Lamy All-Star. And this has a 1.1 steel nib. So, in regard to some writing samples, what I'm going to do is write 3 quotes from one of my favorite movies. And let's see if you can guess the film. So, first of all, with the Sailor. Says, calling it a job, don't make it right, boss. Then the next quote that I have here is with the Visconti. And it is, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Then, on the final quote with the Lamy, it is, sometimes nothing is a very cool hand. And if you didn't figure it out, the film is Cool Hand Luke, starring Paul Newman. Cool Hand Luke is one of my favorite films. If you ask me what my favorite film was on a daily basis, the answer might change depending on the day, but more often than not, the answer is Cool Hand Luke. I could talk about that film for hours. If you've never heard of the film, it came out in 1967, and it's about this man named Luke, played by Paul Newman, who is serving time in a Florida prison camp and refuses to submit to the system. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Luke has found out about the death of someone close to him, and his reaction is to sit on his bunk and sing a song. It's the type of scene you really don't see a lot in film today. The entire film is just outstanding. I can't recommend it highly enough. The film is actually based on a book, which is very interesting, an interesting read as well. The author, Don Pierce, doesn't use quotation marks for dialogue, so it just takes a little while to get used to, but it makes for a unique read. In my office at work, I actually have a Cool Hand Luke piece of artwork that my daughter made for me. She has a risograph printer that she uses a lot, and she created this take on one of the film's posters. It's a unique piece, and I like it a lot. You know, now that I'm looking at this, the text is kind of close together. Maybe next time I'll space this out a little bit better. But I did notice that the flow was very good for each of the pens, and that the ink performs solid on both Tomoe River as well as this 80-gram Rhodia, which is what is right here. You know, there is a fair difference between the darkness of using the fine nib as opposed to a heavier hand or a wider nib. And with the medium nib, the drying time is much longer than using a fine nib. Here it is with the fine nib, and then here it is with a medium nib. And then also I found the shading and sheen to be rather on the low side, with the majority of the color difference coming when you have writing strokes with crossing patterns. So let's actually do a water test here. And we'll let that sit for a second. You know, let's actually take a look at the chromatography. You know, I did it a couple of times to experiment, but this was the end result. You know, that you could really see there is some green and blue, and then yellow and orange and red that are contained in here. I just liked how that turned out, and you could really see the green undertones here. So let's take a look at how our water test is doing. And it fared pretty well. You know, while this ink doesn't profess to be waterproof, you know, I would call that somewhat water resistant, and that it, you know, that the ink didn't dissolve that much, and in fact, similar to the chromatography, it kind of turned the shade of gray-green, and that kind of stayed there, and some of the browner and reds were the ones that that dissolved. The bottom line here is that the Pelikan Edelstein Smoky Quartz is, you know, a very nice chocolate brown with just some undertones of green, and you know, I like it more than I thought I would. You know, I've been into brown inks lately, but most of them have been more in the reddish brown side of things as opposed to the deeper browns. But you know, I will find myself using this ink in the future when I have a pen that might pair up nicely with it. In regard to pens that I think this might pair up with nicely, you know, I think it would pairs up nicely with this Visconti Desert Springs. It's a Divina, especially with the blues and the reds and the browns in here. It would also pair up nicely with this this Omas My Lord Arco Celluloid. It would pair up nice with that, or even something like this Kara's Custom ink. If you'd like to win a bottle of Smoky Quartz ink courtesy of Goulet Pens, all you need to do is leave a comment here on YouTube. Today is Wednesday, April 26th, 2017. You have until 11:59 p.m. on Saturday, April 29th to enter. Sometime after then, I'll randomly select a winner from those who commented. In regard to a comment topic, I'm going to be doing a Q&A here soon, so why don't you leave me a question, pen-related or non-pen related, that you'd like to have answered. The topic is not required to enter, it's just a suggestion. Thanks again to Goulet Pens for providing this ink for review and for giveaway. If you would care to purchase this ink, there is a link to their site in the notes below. It's really a worthwhile addition to the Pelikan line, so it's worth picking up. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll talk to you later.